The morning rain tapped gently against the windows of Miller's Cafe, creating a rhythm that had become as familiar to Thomas Bennett as his own heartbeat. At 52, Thomas had learned that life's greatest comforts often came in the smallest packages: a warm cup of coffee, the smile of his 10-year-old daughter Lucy, and the quiet satisfaction of helping someone in need. Thomas was a man of medium build with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His dark hair was beginning to show threads of silver at the temples, and he had the weathered hands of someone who worked hard for everything he had. He wore simple clothes, usually jeans and a dark jacket, but there was a dignity in the way he carried himself, a quiet strength that came from raising a child on his own while working 2 jobs. Every morning for the past 6 months, Thomas had noticed her. She sat at the corner table by the rain-streaked window, a young woman in her late 20s with long, wavy blonde hair that fell past her shoulders. She had delicate features and wore the same olive-green jacket over a simple cream-colored top, paired with faded jeans that had seen better days. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, though Thomas didn't know that yet. What he did know was that she looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. Sarah would order a single coffee and make it last for hours, sometimes pulling out a worn notebook and writing in it with trembling hands. Thomas had seen enough struggle in his own life to recognize it in others. He'd been where she was, scared, alone, wondering how to make it through another day. On a particularly grey Tuesday morning, Thomas made his decision. He'd been watching Sarah push a muffin around her plate for 20 minutes, taking the smallest bites as if rationing her last meal. Without saying a word, he approached her table carrying a plate with a warm croissant and a fresh cup of coffee. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" he asked, his voice gentle and unassuming. Sarah looked up, startled. Her blue eyes were wary but not unkind. I didn't order this." "I know," Thomas said, setting the plate down carefully. "But I made too much this morning, and I hate to see good food go to waste. Would you be doing me a favor?" It was a small lie, the kind told with good intentions. Sarah studied him for a long moment, and Thomas could see her pride warring with her hunger. Finally, she nodded, just barely. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas smiled and returned to his own table where Lucy sat doing her homework before school. His daughter looked up at him with those perceptive brown eyes that missed nothing. "That was nice, Dad," Lucy said quietly. "Just paying it forward, sweetheart. Someone helped us once when we needed it, remember?" Lucy nodded solemnly. She did remember. She remembered the woman at the grocery store who'd paid for their food when Thomas's card was declined 3 years ago. She remembered the neighbor who'd brought them dinner every night for a month after her mother left. Kindness had a way of echoing through the years. The next morning, Thomas did it again. And the morning after that. It became their routine. He'd bring Sarah breakfast, sometimes toast with jam, sometimes oatmeal with fruit, always something warm and nourishing. They didn't talk much at first. Sarah would nod her thanks, and Thomas would return to his table. But gradually, over the weeks, walls began to come down. "I'm Thomas," he said one rainy morning, about 3 weeks into their silent arrangement. "Sarah," she replied, and then added, "You don't have to keep doing this." "I know I don't have to," Thomas said, sitting down across from her for the first time. "But I'd like to. If that's all right with you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back quickly. "Why?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "When I was going through my divorce, when Luce's mother left us, I was drowning. I was working at the factory during the day and driving for a rideshare service at night, trying to keep our heads above water. People helped us. Strangers, mostly. They didn't ask questions or make me feel small. They just helped. I promised myself that when I was back on my feet, I'd do the same for someone else." "I'm not a charity case," Sarah said, but there was no anger in her voice, only a quiet desperation to hold onto her dignity. "I never thought you were," Thomas replied honestly. "I think you're someone going through a hard time. That's not the same thing." Over the following weeks, their morning conversations grew longer. Sarah began to open up, piece by piece. She'd come to the city with dreams of being a writer, but her savings had run out faster than expected. She'd been working odd jobs, staying in a shelter some nights, sleeping on park benches others. She was ashamed, embarrassed, but she was also fiercely determined not to give up. Thomas never judged her. He listened the way people used to listen, before everyone got too busy and distracted. He listened with his full attention, offering wisdom when asked and silence when that was what she needed more. "My father used to say that life is like the weather," Thomas told her one morning as they watched the rain. "Sometimes it storms, and you get soaked through to the bone. But the sun always comes back eventually. You just have to keep walking until it does. Sarah smiled, really smiled, for the first time since Thomas had met her. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, Thomas said softly. Worked construction his whole life. Died when I was 25. But he taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by his bank account. It's measured by how he treats people when there's nothing in it for him. Lucy had taken to Sarah as well. On the mornings when school started late, she'd join their conversations, telling Sarah about her classes, her friends, her dreams of becoming a teacher. Sarah listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering encouragement. There was something healing in these simple exchanges, something that felt like family even though they were strangers just a few months before. 4 months into their morning routine, on a crisp autumn day when the leaves were turning golden red, everything changed. Thomas was sitting with Sarah and Lucy, laughing at something silly Lucy had said, when the cafe door opened. 4 men in dark suits entered first, their eyes scanning the room with professional efficiency. They were bodyguards, Thomas realized with a jolt. Behind them came 2 people in expensive business attire, lawyers, by the look of them, carrying leather briefcases and wearing expressions of polite determination. The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath. The group walked directly to their table, and Sarah's face went completely white. She half stood, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Sarah Mitchell, one of the lawyers asked, a woman in her 50s with silver-streak hair and a kind but serious face. Yes, Sarah whispered. My name is Catherine Wells. I represent the estate of Margaret Eleanor Mitchell. I've been searching for you for quite some time. The lawyer's expression softened. Sarah, I'm so sorry to inform you that your grandmother passed away 6 weeks ago. Sarah's knees buckled, and Thomas caught her elbow, steadying her. My grandmother, she said, confused. But we haven't spoken in years. Not since I left home. She never stopped looking for you, Catherine said gently. And she never stopped hoping you'd come back. When she fell ill, her final instructions were clear. Find you, no matter how long it took, and make sure you received your inheritance. The word hung in the air like something from a dream. Sarah shook her head. I don't understand. My grandmother. She didn't have money. She lived in a small house in Pennsylvania. Catherine opened her briefcase and pulled out several documents. Your grandmother was Margaret Eleanor Mitchell, formerly Margaret Eleanor Ashford. The Ashford family built their fortune in textiles in the 1800s. Your grandmother chose a simple life, but she never gave up her family's wealth. She's left everything to you, Sarah. Her estate is valued at approximately $18 million. The cafe was utterly silent. Lucy's mouth hung open. Thomas felt his heart hammering in his chest. Sarah sank back into her chair. 18 million. There's also a letter, Catherine said, producing an envelope. She wrote it shortly before she passed. She wanted you to have it. With shaking hands, Sarah opened the envelope. Thomas couldn't see the words, but he could see the tears streaming down Sarah's face as she read. When she finished, she held the letter to her chest and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very center of her being. Lucy, with the uninhibited compassion of childhood, got up and hugged Sarah tightly. Thomas found himself with a lump in his throat, his own eyes wet. After several minutes, Sarah composed herself enough to speak. She says she's sorry. For the argument we had, for the things she said when I told her I wanted to be a writer instead of going to business school. She says she was proud of me for following my dreams, and she prayed every day that I was safe and happy. She says. Sarah's voice broke again. She says she loved me, and she always would, no matter what. Catherine gave Sarah a moment before continuing. There are some papers to sign, legal matters to attend to. But Sarah, as of today, you're a wealthy woman. You'll never have to worry about money again. The lawyers and bodyguards eventually left, arranging to meet Sarah later that day at a law office downtown. When they were gone, the cafe slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though Thomas could feel dozens of eyes still glancing their way. Sarah sat in stunned silence, the letter still clutched in her hands. Thomas didn't know what to say. What did you say to someone whose entire life had just transformed in an instant? Finally, Sarah looked at him, her eyes red but clear. Thomas, I need to tell you something. You don't have to, he started, but she held up a hand. I do. I need you to understand. She took a deep breath. When I first came to this cafe, I was planning. I was thinking about ending things. I was so tired, so lost. I couldn't see a way forward anymore. But then you started bringing me breakfast. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't make me feel worthless. You just saw me. Like I was a person worth seeing. Thomas felt his heart crack open. Every morning, I'd wake up and think, maybe I'll go to the cafe today. Maybe Thomas will be there. You gave me a reason to keep going, even when I couldn't find one myself. You and Lucy both did. You reminded me that there was still kindness in the world, still good people. You saved my life, Thomas. You literally saved my life. Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. His voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. Sarah, I didn't do anything special. I just shared some food. No, she said firmly. You shared your humanity. You shared your time, your attention, your care. You treated me with dignity when I felt I had none left. That's not nothing, Thomas. That's everything. Lucy was crying now too, her head on Sarah's shoulder. The three of them sat there in the cafe, holding onto each other like survivors of a storm. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Sarah. She met with lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors. She inherited her grandmother's house in Pennsylvania, a beautiful old Victorian that needed some love but was filled with memories and family history. She also inherited stock portfolios, real estate holdings, and enough money to live comfortably for several lifetimes. But through it all, she never missed a morning at Miller's Cafe. Now, though, she was the one buying breakfast, for Thomas, for Lucy, and for a rotating cast of people she'd noticed who looked like they needed a little kindness. She'd learned from the best, after all. One morning, about 2 months after the lawyers had found her, Sarah asked Thomas and Lucy to meet her at a different address. When they arrived, they found themselves standing in front of a beautiful brownstone in a good neighborhood. I bought this, Sarah said simply. It's going to be a community center. A place where people can come for help, food, job training, counseling, whatever they need. No judgment, no strings attached. I want to call it Benner House. Thomas stared at her in shock. Sarah, you can't. I can, and I am, she said with a smile. You taught me that the greatest thing we can do with what we have is share it with others. This is me, paying it forward. Besides, I was hoping you might consider running it. I know you're working 2 jobs, but this would pay enough for you to quit both and spend more time with Lucy. Plus, you'd be perfect for it. You understand what it's like to struggle, and you know how to help people without taking away their dignity. Thomas looked at his daughter, who was bouncing on her toes with excitement. He looked at Sarah, who'd gone from a broken woman contemplating the worst to someone with the means and the heart to change lives. He thought about his father's words, about measuring a man's worth not by his bank account but by how he treated people. I'd be honored, he said quietly. Sarah's smile lit up the whole street. Good. Because I've also enrolled in a writing program at the university. I figured it's never too late to chase your dreams, right? But I'll volunteer at the center whenever I can. We'll run it together. Benner House opened 6 months later. It became a beacon in the community, a place where people could come when they'd run out of options and hope. Thomas ran it with the same quiet kindness he'd shown that first morning in the cafe, and Sarah used her resources to make sure they never turned anyone away. Lucy grew up volunteering there, learning her father's lessons about compassion and service. When she eventually became a teacher, as she'd always dreamed, she brought her students to Benner House to teach them that privilege came with responsibility, and that we were all connected in ways we couldn't always see. Years later, on the 5th anniversary of Benner House, a small ceremony was held. Sarah stood at a podium, now a published author with 2 novels to her name, and told the assembled crowd about a dark morning in a cafe when a stranger had given her a croissant and, without knowing it, had given her back her life. We tell ourselves that grand gestures are what matter, she said, her voice steady and strong. We think we need to do big things to make a difference. But sometimes, the smallest act of kindness at exactly the right moment can change everything. Thomas didn't rescue me with money or power. He rescued me with attention, with consistency, with the simple message that I mattered. That's what we try to do here at Benner House. We try to see people, really see them, and remind them that they matter. Thomas stood in the back of the room, Lucy beside him, now a young woman of 20. His hair was more grey than dark now, and he developed the slight stoop that came with age and hard work, but his eyes still crinkled when he smiled. You did good, Dad, Lucy whispered, squeezing his hand. We did good, he corrected gently. All of us together. As the ceremony ended and people mingled, Thomas found himself thinking about his father's words about weather and storms. Sarah had been right in the middle of a storm when he'd met her, and he'd been able to offer her a small shelter. But she'd done something even more remarkable. She turned her own storm into a source of strength and used it to shelter countless others. That night, as Thomas locked up Benner House and headed home, he passed Miller's Cafe. Through the window, he could see a young man sitting alone at a corner table, nursing a single cup of coffee with the look of someone who was trying to make it last. Tomorrow morning, Thomas decided, he'd stop by before work. Maybe strike up a conversation. Maybe buy the kid breakfast. After all, you never knew when a simple act of kindness might save a life. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall, gentle and cleansing. Thomas turned up his collar and smiled. He'd learned long ago that storms always passed eventually. Sometimes, you just had to keep walking. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got to walk alongside others and remind them that morning always came, and with it, the promise of warmth, connection, and hope.